Alright gang, so we're back here to talk about another one of those defects that you need to know, and this one today is going to be based on mold. And mold has kind of got a bad reputation. It's kind of seen as a dirty little word, and it's generally not liked to be spoken during a home inspection, nor in general when you're talking about someone's home. They don't like to hear the M word. Mold is a dirty little word, but is it? Let's get into that. Not all forms of mold are bad. Now, in lots of cases, we use mold to help our lives be better. And in which case, you would be looking at how we use molds to make cheeses age, how we use molds in the form of yeast to make breads and other types of grain products. We also use molds to enhance the texture of our wines. It also is used in products like penicillin to make antibiotics and other types of drugs. Now, there are some really bad types of mold, like Stachybotrys is one of them. And Stachybotrys does have a history of sometimes producing toxins that can be very harmful to us. And these toxins could be contained in the airborne spores in which the mold uses to reproduce. Now, Stachybotrys is very rare. It's not something that we come across on a regular basis. Lots of times people think black mold is Stachybotrys, and that's not necessarily true. Most black mold falls into the lesser categories of molds as far as their problems they cause for humans. And these molds are the most common types of mold are going to be Cladosporium, Penicillium, and Aspergillus. Now these generally just lead to minor allergic reactions, and black mold would fall into that category. Stachybotrys, the only way to know if you have Stachybotrys or to know if you have a harmful type of mold is through scientific testing, and in which case samples would need to be taken and things like that. Now when it comes to mold, it is one thing important to know is that mold is everywhere. Mold's on your skin, it's on your clothes, it's in your car, it's in your house. And the problem that mold presents is when it gathers in large amounts, and then it can cause sorts of decay in large amounts of spores and things that can lead to some of these allergic reactions. And when it comes to these large amounts of spores, they can generally be treated, and the treatment is usually going to be around a what's called a biocide. And these biocides are sometimes related to chlorine products or bleach products, but you can also use RMR86, which is going to be the most common type of mold remover used by professionals. Now, removing mold is only one part of the solution. And when it comes to mold, you need to remove the source of the moisture. So mold requires two things. One is moisture, and it requires organic material. Now, and it requires oxygen and temperature as well. But ultimately, those two things that are more controllable are going to be your organic material and the moisture level. So when we find mold in a home, it's usually going to be around areas where we have moisture and we have things that the mold can feed or grow on. And this would usually be drywall, it could be the wood in your home, it could be just debris or dust sitting on the walls of your basement. All these are things that could lead to mold growth. And the more moisture and more organic material that's in the area, the more exacerbated the growth of these mold spores will be. And when we're looking at mold spores, generally they're clear to the naked eye. It's not something you or I could generally look at and see the mold spores. What we are seeing is the decayed mold spores, the dead mold spores, and you're seeing this black and gray or bluish green discoloration, and that's what you usually see in like your basements and those kinds of things. Now this mold in your basement is really a very minor inconvenience because it can very easily be treated with a kind of the solution of 1/3 bleach, 2/3 water. You can also use RMR86 and those other types of biocides to remediate the mold. Now, the main thing is, though, again, taking care of the cause of that mold, or the mold will, with all likelihood, return. As far as mold in a home goes, there's going to be a couple of common places that we're going to see mold. One is we're going to see mold in the basement, where there's lots of moisture. Most of the basements here in the state of Wisconsin and crawl spaces should be running some sort of a dehumidification system. This dehumidification system will ultimately dry out the area and make sure that there isn't that excess moisture for mold to grow. Generally in a home, what you're looking for as far as a humidity level is between 30 and 60% relative humidity. If you're too low, you're going to end up with static shocks when you touch each other or touch the doorknob or pet the dog. You might also, if you're too high, find that you're going to get condensation build up on your windows. You're going to find condensation dripping on your walls and stuff in really humid situations. But ultimately, we need to manage that humidity in our home, so be between that 30 and 60% relative humidity. Now, in a basement, it's hard to manage because our soil has a lot of moisture in it in Wisconsin, and that moisture does penetrate through the masonry block or the poured concrete walls that we do have in our home. So one thing that we can do to help remediate that again is that a dehumidification system. The dehumidification system will pull the moisture out of the air, send it down through the drain, and basically make the air much drier. Now, other types of systems in your basement can help with that as well, but the dehumidification system is usually the best way to go. One of the most common places that we see it is going to be in the attic. And in the attic is a place where we require high amounts of ventilation, okay, and it's where we're having some of the heat from the home being taken to the outside, just naturally as it works its way through the insulation. And if this heat gets trapped in that attic and doesn't have proper ventilation, now it's going to condensate on the cold surfaces, causing that excess moisture and causing the mold that we can find. Now, this mold would usually form on the underside of the roof sheathing and would form black splotchy areas or gray areas that would basically be those dead mold spores that we're seeing. But there's usually many live spores all over the place in there, sometimes dormant depending on temperatures and things like that. And in some cases, some people may address the moisture problem, but they end up with a continued issue because the mold spores are still there and they were not remediated at all. The mold spores can be in the insulation, they can be on the surface of the attic and those types of things. And really the best way to treat those is to treat them again with those biocides, RMR86, bleach, whatever it may be, and ultimately killing any mold spores that are in the area, removing a certain amount of the insulation that's up in the area to try to get rid of as many mold spores as possible, and then ultimately sealing that roof surface so that the mold spores can no longer grow on that surface. It's usually going to be treated with some sort of a moldicide. It usually will look like, if you look up in the attic, it would look like a white painted surface, and this white painted surface basically makes it more difficult for the mold to grow on that surface. When it comes to other areas of the home where you may find mold, you may end up with mold in your walls, you may end up with mold in your bathroom, you may end up with mold in your toilet or in your sink if you're not cleaning it as regularly as you should. But ultimately the mold can be treated, it can be cleaned, and when we do that, that'll help alleviate some of the mold spores that are in our homes. Mold spores are the mold's way of reproducing, and as it goes through that reproduction process, it alleviates these spores, and these spores then float out through the air for us to breathe in, consume, and to land on different surfaces for us to transport around and stuff. To determine if mold is a problem in your home, there really needs to be a mold evaluation. If you had a home inspection done, they may call out and say, hey, there's evidence of mold in your attic, there's evidence of mold in your basement, there's evidence of mold over here, X, Y, and Z, and these are usually areas that need to be looked at more closely by a mold evaluator. Now, this mold evaluator is going to come in and they're going to take samples. These may be surface samples, they may be air samples, and usually there's going to be a certain percentage of the home evaluated. Now, these mold samples will be sent out to a laboratory. The laboratory will determine what type of mold it is, and then it'll also determine the concentration of the mold spores. All of this being said, mold is something that a lot of people are overly concerned about, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be concerned. Now, as far as what that means is that if you are hyperallergic to mold, if you are more sensitive than other people to mold spores, okay, and maybe you have more severe reactions allergically to mold spores, then it is definitely a situation where a mold inspection or mold evaluation would be a good idea to make sure that you remain healthy, or whoever the member of your family is that suffers from those types of allergies would remain healthy. Your average person, however, is not going to be dramatically affected by most mold spores or most molds that may be found in a home, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't clean your home or make sure to remediate the mold that is present in the home. When it comes to these allergic reactions, some people may have more severe allergic reactions than others. In some cases, you may have severe asthma reactions, so it may close up your airways and stuff, making it harder for you to breathe. In some cases, you may get skin rashes or dizziness and those types of things. But these are all basically just allergic reactions to different types of mold spores. Now, the mold spores can be treated and things like that, but you need to find where they're located, where they're coming from, and how the individual that is allergic to them is being exposed. The most common way that you're going to recognize that there is a mold issue in your home or that someone is having an allergic reaction to mold is they're going to be sneezing, they're going to get runny noses, they're going to get red eyes, they're going to get dizziness, they're going to get headaches, they may even get skin rashes. And these are all things that can be looked at further by your doctor to determine if you're suffering from some sort of allergic reaction and what that allergic reaction is attributed to. If you find that the allergic reaction is attributed to some sort of mold, that mold may be present in your home, and getting your home tested for mold would be a good idea. When it comes to the home inspection, your home inspector may observe mold in the home. And if they do so, they'll usually list it as a defect to the home because it is a potential health risk. Now, they will usually also, at the same time, refer it for further evaluation by a mold specialist. The mold specialist is going to be the person that comes in and sends those samples off to the lab to get tested. Hey gang, Matt the Helpful Home Inspector here. Thanks again for tuning in today. I really appreciate you. If you wouldn't mind hitting the subscribe button down below, the bell notification over there will make you aware of new content we got coming out. Thumbs up if you like the video, and give me a comment down below on something you'd like to learn about. Thanks again for tuning in, you guys. Remember, the better you take care of your house, the better it'll take care of you.